rode down through here. Then on January the 26th, 1880, they took 40 wagons down through here on that day. And when they got down, and all of them down, I should say they got 39 wagons down. And Stanford Smith, who was down at the bottom of the hole, helping people get their wagons down, he looked around and his wagon hadn't been brought down. And so he asked where it was, and they said, well, it's back up at the top. And so he hurried back up here and found his wagon parked here somewhere, and nobody to help him go down except his wife. And so I'll pick up the story at that particular point on it. It's quite a fascinating little story. At last the word came that all the wagons were down, and the crossing on the ferry began. Stanford looked around for his family and wagon, but they were nowhere in sight. He dropped his shovel and climbed the top of the crevice. There, huddled in a heap of tattered quilts on packed dirty snow, he found his wife, her baby swathed in blankets in her arms. "Stanford, I thought you'd never come," she exclaimed. "But where are the other children, Hughes, and the wagon?" he asked. "They're over there. They moved the wagons back while they took the others down." She pointed to a rusty stovepipe showing above a huge sandstone boulder. For a moment, Stanford's face flushed with rage. He threw his hat on the ground and stomped it, as was his habit when he was angry. "With me down there helping to get their wagons down on the raft, I thought someone would bring my wagon down, Stratum. I've got the horses, harness, and things all packed," Bell breathlessly assured him as they ran toward the wagon. Stanford hooked up the team, two at the tongue, and old Nig tied to the rear axle. The fourth horse, the cripple, had died to 50-mile spring. The children woke up and tumbled from their bed in the wagon and wanted to help. Stanford climbed in and unlocked the brakes, paused long enough to give each one of the youngsters a parachute. Arabella climbed in and laid the baby on the bed as Stanford started the team toward the crevice, through which the wagon must be lowered to the river. "I'll cross-lock the wheels. Please throw me the chains, Belle." She did as he asked and then jumped down to help. Stanford took her arm and they walked to the top of the crevice where, hand in hand, they looked down. 10 feet of loose sand, then a rocky pitch as steep as the roof of a house and barely as wide as the wagon. Below that dizzy chute down to the landing place, once fairly level, and now plowed up with wheels and hoofs. Below that they could not see. But Stanford knew what was down there. Boulders, washouts, dugouts, like narrow shells. But it was the first drop of 150 feet that frightened him. "I'm afraid we can't make it," he exclaimed. "But we've got to make it," she answered calmly. They went back to the wagon where Stanford checked the harness, the axles, the trees and the brakes, tires and the brakes. He looked at Belle and felt a surge of admiration for this brave, beautiful girl. They had been called to go to the San Juan, and they would go. With such a wife, no man could beat. "If we only had a few men to hold the wagon back, we'd make it, Belle." "I'll do the holding back, that Belle, on old Nick's line. Isn't that what he's tied there back there for?" "Well, any man with any sense in his head wouldn't let a woman do that," he cried. "What else is there to do?" she countered. "But Belle, the children, they will have to stay up here. We'll come back for them. And if we don't come back, we'll come back. We've got to," answered Belle. Carefully, she set 3-year-old Roy on a folded quilt back from the crevice. Between his short legs, she put the baby and told him, "Hold little brother till Papa comes for you." She told Ada to sit in front of her brothers and say a little prayer. She kissed each one and tucked them snugly around them. "Now don't move, dears. Don't even stand up. And as soon as we get the wagon down, Papa will come back for you." Ada turned to Stanford. "Will you come back, Papa?" He could only nod a yes and turn away with tears. "Then I'm not afraid. We'll stay here with God till you and Mama get the wagon down." And Ada began her little prayer. "Father in heaven, bless me and Roy and baby till our father comes back." To take Belle's mind off the children, Stanford told her to test Nig's lines. "Pull back as hard as you can. I'll bet you couldn't pull the legs off a flea." Arabella wrapped the lines around her strong, supple hands. Stanford got on board. "Here we go. Hold on to your lines." Arabella smiled at her little brood. "We'll be right back," she called. Stanford braced his legs against the dashboard, and they started down through the hole in the rock. The first lurch nearly pulled Belle off her feet. She dug her heels in to hold her balance. Old Nig was thrown to his haunches. Arabella raced after him in the wagon, holding the lines with desperate strength. Nig rolled to his side and gave a shrill near of terror. His dead weight would be just as good alive when she thought. Just then her foot caught between two rocks. She kicked it free but lost her balance and went sprawling after old Nig. She was blinded by the sand which streamed after her. She gritted her teeth and hung on to the lines. A jagged rock tore the flesh and hot pain ran up her leg from heel to hip. The wagon struck a huge boulder. The impact jerked her to her feet and flung her against the side of the cliff. The wagon finally stopped with the team wedged under the tongue, and Stanford leaped to the ground and loosened the tugs between the team, then turned to Arabella. There she stood, her face white against the red sandstone. He used to tell us that she was the most gallant thing he had ever seen, as she stood there defiant, blood besmeared, bent begrimed, and with her eyes flashing, dared him to sympathize. In a shaky voice he asked, "How are you, Belle?" "Oh, I just crow-hopped right along," she answered. He looked away. He walked to the apparently lifeless form of Nig and felt his flank. It quivered under his hand, and Nig tried to raise his bruised and battered head. Stanford then looked back up the crack. Up there on a sharp rock 100 feet above him waved a piece of white cloth, a piece of her garment. Why, she had been dragged all that way. "Looks like you lost your handkerchief, Belle." He tried to force a laugh. Instead, he choked and grabbed her to him, his eyes going swiftly over her. A trickle of blood ran down her leg, making a pool on the rocks. "Belle, you're hurt, and we're here all alone." "Old Nick dragged me all the way," she admitted. "Is your leg broken?" he faltered. She wouldn't have his sympathy, not just yet, anyway. "Does that feel like it's broken?" she fairly screamed and kicked his shin with fury. He felt like shaking her, but her chin began quivering, and he had to grin, knowing by her temper she wasn't hurt too badly. He put his arms around her, and both began crying, then laughing with relief. They had done it. They had taken the last wagon down alone. Stanford put Belle on a bed in the wagon, found the medicine kit, cleaned the long gash in her leg. "Darling, will you be all right?" "Of course I will. Just leave me here and go as fast as you can for the children." "I'll hurry," he flung over his shoulder and began the steep climb up the incline. He had just come down. He passed old Nig, who was trying to regain his feet. He climbed too fast and became dizzy. He slowed down and looked around him. He had driven a wagon down that fearful crevice and dragged his wife behind, her clothes and flesh torn, and she had gamely said she'd just crow-hopped right along. God bless her gallant heart. He kicked the rocks at his feet, and with tears streaming down his face, lifted his hat in salute to Arabella, his wife. "Papa, Papa," came the faint cry far up the crevice. He answered, "Papa's coming, Ada." His voice echoed and re-echoed among the rocks as he called to the children over and over. At last he reached the top to find the 3 little ones sitting where their mother had left them. "God stayed with us," said Ada. "The baby's gone to sleep, and my arm's near broke," said Roy. Little George woke up and smiled a toothless grin. Stanford Smith lifted the baby tenderly in his arms, and took his son's hand in his hat. With Arabella clinging to his pocket, went down to Arabella. Stanford's wagon lumbered out of the canyon, the team painfully limping. Old Nig followed behind on trembling legs, his hide torn in places, bleeding in places. Just before they reached the river's edge, 5 men came into view just ahead of them, carrying chains and ropes. "Look, Stanford," she said, "they are coming to help." He cracked his whip and shouted to his team and bore down on the men, evidently without any intention of stopping. They jumped out of the road just in time. "We came back to help you," one of the men began, but Stanford cut him short. "How's the ferry, boys? Any left for us?" "Brother Smith, we didn't." Again he was cut short. Stanford hadn't gotten over the bitterness he felt when his family was left at the top of the hole. He glanced at Arabella. She was pale. He remembered her gallant conduct and was ashamed of his own ill temper. "Forget it, fellows. We managed fine. My wife here's all the help a fellow needs." Arabella's smile forgave his petulance. They went down to the ferry, followed by the abashed men. The wagon was loaded on the raft. Arabella lay on a pallet at the raft's edge and watched Red Cliff's walls recede, then closed her eyes and slept. When Stanford lifted her to the wagon an hour later, she was completely relaxed. That's it. I think that's one of the great stories that you find with the hole in the rock, and that's why people want to come here. They hear these and they want to see, where did that actually happen? And they need to be able to come.
Jerry, where's that taken from?
It's in Smith, Miller's book.